All right, everyone. Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining our Match Development Days session that is focused on avoiding pitfalls and direct admission strategies. Real quick housekeeping item before we get started. We are recording this, so all attendees and registrants will get a copy of today's presentation. We do have a Q&A box, and we'd encourage you all to use it. We're going to try and get to those at the end, but if we do run out of time, we will follow up separately. Now, for those of you I have not met, my name is Jamie Conkey. I serve as the Senior Director for Match, and I'm joined today by my colleague Laura Galloway, our Senior Manager for Match, and most likely your primary point of contact for this program. Now, Laura and I spend a lot of time with institutions across the country and around the globe working on their direct admission strategy. And this topic is one that comes up, I think, over and over again. So instead of just walking you through best practices today, we wanted to focus on something a little bit more real, specifically the common pitfalls that we've seen institutions fall into as they're adopting direct admissions, and obviously what you can do to avoid those pitfalls. Um, I feel like the truth is that everyone loves a cautionary tale. Sometimes the most valuable lessons that come from things come from when it doesn't quite go as planned. So we've built today's session really around real world experiences of our partners and other colleagues in the higher ed field. As always, everything backed by data and informed by what we've learned, supporting a wide range of institutions, both large and small, domestic and international. So I'm going to start by first acknowledging the broader context that we're all operating in right now. The policy landscape is moving fast. So whether it's changes in federal aid, immigration policies, or state level funding shifts, it is a lot to keep up with, and that makes your long-term planning very difficult. So we know you're trying to make strategic decisions in real time. You're often doing that with incomplete or rapidly changing information. So we know how hard that is, especially when it feels like it's out of your control. For those of you who are not familiar, EAB does put together regular federal policy primers, and that's to help institutions kind of cut through the noise and sort of understand exactly what these changes mean, specifically for enrollment strategy. So we'll share those with you after today's session if you've not already seen them. They're not gate kept or anything. They're on the EAB website. They're open for every professional in the space. We just want to make sure that you have access to those resources. Now, even if the policy environment were stable, which it's not, enrollment leaders would still be facing another major shift. And that's what we're going to talk about next, which is how student behavior is really changing and what that means for how we engage with them. So we know that students today are approaching the college search and decision process with more scrutiny than ever. They are asking harder questions, they're weighing different factors, and in a lot of cases, they're being influenced by broader social and political dynamics. So what you're seeing on this slide is from EAB's 2025 first year experience survey. What we do here is we gather responses from about 12,000 first-year students, and then we dig into their college search and application behaviors. We figure out what drove their enrollment decisions, and then we ask sort of how satisfied they are now that they've spent a year on campus. One of the most striking findings, I think, from this survey was that nearly 1 in 3 students actually removed a college from their list for political reasons. And we also saw a noticeable uptick in students saying that a safe campus meant one where they felt free to express their views without harassment. So yes, the environment is changing, but so are the students. And we feel that institutions really need to adapt to both of those things. It's not just student preferences that are evolving, also, it's just overall demand itself. If you have been to any EAB webinars in the past year, you've probably seen this chart before. What it's showing basically is that across all tiers of higher ed, from the most elite institutions to regional publics, we are seeing a very clear trend. There is declining enrollment demand across the board. And we've seen a considerable amount of research showing that this growing phenomenon, I guess as we're calling it, of non-consumption, right? Where students are opting out of higher ed entirely. They are questioning the return on investment of a degree. They are increasingly turning to alternatives like AI-driven careers, content creation, or entrepreneurship via social platforms. None of those alternatives really have clear, stable pathways just yet, but they do have enough pull to really disrupt the traditional pipeline. So that disruption is really being felt everywhere in our sector. And what that means is that more and more institutions are getting proactive and creative, a la direct admission. So we know that institutions are actively looking for ways to really supplement their traditional enrollment strategies. And if you are here, you know that that'd be one of the major areas of that that's gaining a lot of traction is direct admission. So congrats to you all for being ahead of the curve. But for what it's worth, I think it is important to note that direct admissions, as you all know, it covers that's a phrase, a term that ranges a lot of different approaches. So at one end of the spectrum, you've got sort of these lightweight kind of marketing campaigns, really, where it's just like an email campaign or a public notification letting students know that they may be eligible for admission, and it's more of an invitation to apply. So these campaigns are not really moving the needle. They're not requiring a lot of infrastructure, and they don't usually result in an actual offer for that student unless the student goes through the sort of the traditional hoops, right? Which is like submitting an application on their own. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got dedicated tools or platforms similar to us, right? Built specifically for direct admissions. And these support kind of structured, scalable processes where students can receive offers. And with us, that means including scholarships and program information. Um, and again, for us, where institutions can really track their engagement across those students in a very meaningful way. So, for the purposes of today's discussion, obviously we're talking about things more centralized to how we on Match do it. But if you are using any other direct admission tools, models, things, whether or not it's supported by technology or platforms, I think you're going to find that some of the strategies and pitfalls that we're talking about are really applicable across the spectrum. Um, we're seeing a lot of what we're talking about here in a survey that we did a little bit earlier this summer, where we gathered about 90 colleges and universities that were either actively using or exploring direct admissions across the board. So not specifically matched, just all of the different alternatives that are out there as well. The top reported benefits that they said they were seeing were faster admissions processes and increased application volume. So both of those are really indicators that a well executed direct admission strategy can actually simplify the funnel and increase its effectiveness. But, and I think this is really key, those outcomes are not guaranteed. So just under half of the respondents did not see ROI in key areas like yield. And what that tells us is that just adopting a new model alone, it's not enough. Institutions that are seeing strong results are those that have adapted their processes. They've adapted their communications, their team structure, their timelines to really support this new model in a way that actually works for students. So that's the distinction that we're going to keep coming back to throughout the rest of today's webinar. Now, if you like me, you love an outside of industry example. So let's take a step outside of higher ed and breathe some fresh air here for a minute and look at what I think is a pretty familiar story. I think a lot of you may actually still have a Blockbuster card floating around your house somewhere. But I want to sort of revisit this moment in time, right? The late 90s, early 2000s, Blockbuster really dominated the video rental market. They had the customers, they had the brand, they had the infrastructure, they had everything they needed to win in the next chapter of their industry. So when Netflix launched in the early aughts, Blockbuster noticed. They didn't just ignore it. So what they did, and I didn't realize this as someone kind of growing up around that time, I didn't realize that Blockbuster actually launched their own DVD rental service in 2004. And actually later, they even launched their own streaming platform. I don't know if any of you even knew that that happened, but it did. The reason we didn't know, or the reason we didn't really pay much attention to it, is they didn't commit, right? They kind of treated digital as sort of this side project, and they really doubled down on their physical stores. They added popcorn machines, they upgraded to these in-store experiences. They really tried to enhance the very model that was actively being disrupted. The Blockbuster leadership kind of admitted later on that they were leaning into they were afraid that leaning into the streaming world would actually cannibalize their core business, which was sales and late fees. And instead of making sort of a thoughtful transition, they actually waited too long and then Netflix passed them by. And we have this great quote from a Blockbuster executive that basically said that we failed because we lacked the guts to make the change. I think that hopefully you're drawing the parallel here to direct admissions. It's, simply adapting a new tool or model is not enough. To succeed, you really do need to actually rethink the process and the mindset behind it. So that doesn't mean you have to blow everything up overnight. No one would have gone to Blockbuster in the early 2000s and said, you need to close all your stores. Um, but what it does mean is being willing to evolve and thinking strategically and intentionally and really with your student experience kind of at the center. So again, this is not, you don't need to go blow up your entire recruitment strategies, but real success with direct admissions is going to require some thoughtful adaptation and a commitment to staying student-centered. And we're going to help you do that. So let's talk about those common pitfalls that we've seen as partners who are adopting direct admissions. Um, Now, each of these sort of pitfalls that you're seeing here, failure to treat direct admits as a unique population, especially in your communications and marketing, neglecting your non-student stakeholders, focusing on a very, geographically limited area. These challenges are all solvable. We have distilled a set of strategies um, that I think our most successful partners really use to adapt and thrive. So the next few slides, we're going to be talking through each of those. Let me pull up each of our strategies for walking through those. So we're going to talk through first adjusting your approach to build affinity with your direct admit students. This first pitfall is really truly about assuming that the same old yield playbook is going to work with your direct admission students. It's not. These students are often entering your funnel in a very different way. And it's not because they applied after months of an effective drip email campaign or because they were convinced by your compelling admissions recruiters who were visiting their schools. It's because you put an offer in front of them up front. So that really changes the game. You need to kind of shift your team's focus towards cultivating affinity post offer, which is when it matters most for these students. So that means adjusting your messaging, building out some new touch points, and rethinking how you're engaging with these students as people, not just prospective applicants. My computer has gotten stuck. There we go. Sorry. Um, Going back to that survey that I was talking about earlier, we asked all of our institutions to tell us which of the metrics they use to evaluate the success of direct admissions. And no surprise, yield, the actual enrollment, was far and away the number one indicator. But it was also reported as the greatest challenge. And that's not really surprising. If you are truly running direct admission strategies, it means that you're actually admitting students. You're not just inviting them to apply. So that means your overall yield rate is naturally going to decrease, and that is okay, and it should be expected. But it changes where and how you need to spend your time and your energy. So you're admitting students earlier before the traditional courtship happens, if you'll forgive the metaphor. So institutions really kind of need to reframe how you're thinking about your funnel. You are shifting a conversational moment. Historically, you've spent 3 years chasing students to get them to apply. And if you actually think about this, if you think about the trends that we just talked about and what we know about this generation, does that still make sense? This slide, hopefully, visualizes exactly kind of what's at stake. Under your traditional admissions model, your team is spending most of the fall chasing down application components. You're answering deadline and requirement questions, a lot of times for students who may not actually even complete their applications and obviously ultimately enroll. So what you're seeing on this slide is the communications timeline for a student's senior year side by side, your traditional model versus what's possible with a direct admission strategy. In the traditional approach, your first few months, right? August through December, you're dominated by deadlines, reminders, application status checks, and sort of general process management. You are spending a lot of energy just getting students to start or finish their applications. And that is a lot of energy on maybes. If you're lucky, your decisions are going out in February and March, which gives you maybe 6 weeks, often less, to do all of your yield work, sending financial aid packages, answering critical questions, reassuring your families, and trying to sort of create this sense of fit and belonging all before May 1. On match, things really start to change. You can start your year, August, issuing admission offers, and that opens up the entire rest of the year for true yield work. So that means more time to talk about things that truly matter in the decision-making process, right? Financials, student experience, academic support, campus life, student outcomes, all of the questions that students and families actually need before they can make the choice to enroll. So this isn't just a change in timing, it's actually a complete shift in how your counselors are engaging. So maybe historically 20% of your counselors' conversations were actually post-offer. But with Match, that's flipping. You've got up to 90% of your conversations happening after the offer's been made. So that means we need to think about starting to train our teams a little bit differently. If most of their job is now about yield and conversion, they might need new tools, new messaging, new supports to do that as well. Because now the question is not what's the deadline? It's actually why should I choose you? Let me pop this over to Laura to talk through some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the spirit of avoiding this match pitfall, I wanted to provide some tangible takeaways. So, in addition to the research that Jamie shared, we're always conducting focus groups and surveys specific to match students and counselors. And this research has really given us two main takeaways for this specific group. And these takeaways are not going to be mind-blowing for you, but they are incredibly important to the student journey. So, we wanted to bring them to your attention from the student perspective. And on the next slide, our first recommendation is to reaffirm a student's admission through Match. And so this is a perfect example with our fake university. So imagine you're a student who has created your profile from Match, you've gone through the onboarding with our team as part of your classroom experience, and you get an offer from Woodley University, our fake institution. The profile, the offer, everything is engaging enough for your interest to be piqued, and you say, Yep, I want to learn more. And so you click interested, and this is the first official communication that you receive from an institution. So on the next slide, you'll see kind of some of those pitfalls. And so students and counselors shared that receiving this kind of message really stops the positive momentum. They see the track your application and aren't really sure what to do with that because they didn't apply, nor do they need to apply. But then they don't know what steps they're going to take because then they also see the missing credentials piece. And it just causes a lot of questions and confusion. And so outside of the offers listed, they don't know that they're admitted and don't know what they need to do. And so what I've heard in conversations with universities is that you may not even be aware that this type of message is sending because it's automated by your CRM to send to all students as that information is coming through the data transfer. And so just as a reminder, these students should be coming into your Conflow as admitted students. And even if that is set up correctly, this message still may be unintentionally firing off. Sometimes we also find during the onboarding that there's a little bit of a disconnect between the match users who absolutely know this and maybe your CRM point of contact where they don't necessarily know that students don't need to complete an application. But the good news here is that I've heard this message is fairly easy to turn off with a button. And so we can certainly dive into that further. So instead, let's take a look at our recommendation for the first email. And so you'll see that this message reiterates their admission through Match, both by updating the language within the message itself, but also adding in the Match logo, which students have been seeing through the onboarding and through the offer process. So in this email, it easily clears up to a student and says this is a real offer and solidifies their admissions and immediate next steps. After reaffirming admission, the second big piece of communications is to incorporate your highlight reel into your match student communications. So 80% of match students learned about your institution through match. So it's safe to assume, and what Jamie highlighted showcases this as well, that the majority of your matches have not been receiving your extensive lead gen and inquiry emails. And so you'll see kind of the big five buckets that EAB research indicates that students want to know a little bit more about. But let's put this into perspective again from a student example. So take a look at this inbox of what some institutions yield communication looks like because they're assuming that students have been receiving those warming emails. So you'll see this is very transactional from a student perspective. So imagine you've hit interest on your offer, you get that thank you for applying email, and then the rest of your email inbox is very transactional of track your status, file your FAFSA, log in, submit your deposit. So I know because I worked in admissions that these tasks are incredibly important for a student to complete, but it may not be exciting for a student who hasn't yet learned about your institution. And so instead, students and counselors are kind of expecting a good mix of transactional and transformational, like this example. And so I'm not asking you to reinvent your entire communication flow. I've worked in admissions, I know that can take a lot of time, but I am asking you to repurpose some of your existing inquiry comms and just update that call to action from apply to connect with your counselor, learn about your major, take a campus tour. Any call to action that really reaffirms their admission status is something that students and counselors have indicated is a good fit. And we know that around this time last year, we talked with several institutions who made some of these tweaks that we're talking about and saw more student engagement this year as a result of that. And so the key takeaway here is it's not just about sending offers, but it's about how supported a student feels along the way. And since this has just been such a standout factor in feedback from students and counselors, the match team wants to help. And so first up, we're providing a match communication yield guide that really dives further into what we discussed. So we'll provide a specific formula for the first three communications after the match, just to reaffirm that admission status. And we know each institution is a little different, so we've provided several versions of this template. One that has an example with no admissions conditions, another that does include admissions conditions, and then one that has conditional scholarships. And we certainly don't have to stop there, and we can continue iterating that as we need more examples for institutions. This guide is also going to connect you to the current match logos so that if you're interested in co-branding, you're able to do so. And then last up, EAB is just a research powerhouse. And so it's going to include direct links to a lot of research around hyper-personalization and yield communication so that if your team really wants to dig in for direct admits as well as just all admitted students, you've got the tools to do so. The other piece is as part of your match package for the upcoming year, you're going to receive a complimentary yield communication audit tailored specifically for your match students. So this is going to give you the confirmation that the match student journey is exactly what you're hoping for. And we can work together to identify tweaks that we want to make early on so that we can really just continue the momentum through the year. So I hope that these perspectives really highlight the importance to shift in how you're engaging with match students because you can really switch the conversation, as Jamie was sharing, from what's the deadline, what's the process, to why I should choose you from a student perspective.
All right. So we've got a lot of stuff to blow through, so I am going to try and go really quickly. I apologize in advance, but we crammed this webinar full of lots of things. So up until this point, we've looked at how to tailor your messaging and yield tactics. It's time to actually widen our lens a little bit now. So these students don't make decisions alone. In the next section, we're going to sort of explore how to bring in the people who guide them. Specifically, we're going to show you how Match kind of arms you with data that can turn those influencers into your biggest advocates. So the first one we want to talk about is the counselor data. Match already captures a student's counselor name, their email, their school, whenever a match happens, right? But only if you're mapping it. So if you've been with us for many years, we did not used to have that. And so I want to just take, like I would encourage you after today's session, start with a data check. Take 5 minutes to confirm that the counselor name, the counselor email, they're all flowing into your CRM. If you are not currently using counselor information, if that's not a population that you've typically spent much time on, really, I would encourage maybe start thinking about it. This is a great time to do that. There's a lot of research within NACAC, International ACAC, NAFSA, CIS. Oh, there's all of these big publications are coming out with we need to be focusing on counselors. Um, so once you have checked to make sure that you're pulling in counselor information, also if you're having trouble with that, reach out. We can help you with it. We've got 6 mostly low lift and very high impact ways to engage counselors, ranging from school visits and presentations to webinars, offering one-on-one meetings with counselors that, are in regions that you've not typically engaged with in the past. Offering quarterly email newsletters. This is probably one of the easiest things. You usually have these already going out. You just need to make a few small tweaks to make them relevant to your direct admissions population. An advisory board, asking a few key counselors to test new strategies and give feedback. I mean, this can be a mixture of your counselors that constantly are sending students to you and also mixing in some new ones that maybe have never sent any. It's a great opportunity to pull that group together. Remember that counselors move around, and this is especially true in the international world. their loyalty follows. So if you invest in these touch points now, every time they change schools, they're going to carry your institution's story with them.
And in the next, building more connections and making offers more real for students is communicating with their family and supporters. So a 2024 EAB survey of parents indicated that 73% of parents want direct communication from colleges. And since a year has passed, I can only imagine that that number has increased. So with that in mind, we also want to highlight that in addition to the counselor information, you also have parent and supporter information for each match at your fingertips. It is a required field for students to enter before they enter your CRM. So as you're reaffirming a student's admission, I recommend adding all three emails to one of those three communications that reaffirms admissions. Just copy in the student, copy in the supporter and the counselor so that they can all celebrate together and know that an offer was made. So I've included the specific columns where this information exists in the data transfer for you to share with your CRM team. But again, we can help with that if should that be needed. The match team also wants to help capitalize on these key supporters. And so starting in September, when a student receives their offer, we're automatically going to notify their key supporters. So this is those parents, family members, and counselors with a personalized email celebrating the news. But to help them better understand what makes your institution special, we're launching on-demand information sessions that are going to be delivered alongside each of those notifications. And these sessions are meant to be warm, welcoming, and informative, kind of a chance to make your first impression to these counselors and supporters of the student. So we're asking each institution to record a short, engaging video, thinking 5 to 15 minutes, that kind of introduces your school to these key supporters. So you can showcase what makes your campus unique, your academic strengths, cost and affordability, and ultimately why students are choosing you. So we'll follow up this session with a link on where to submit your video, but the September offers are going out on September 15th. So that is the first deadline to submit your video to be part of that first round of offers where this is going to be showcasing to students. So we're really excited about this new initiative.
Right. We also want to, as we move into the third thing here, we want to acknowledge something that's very real for every enrollment leader right now, which is that your budgets are tight and the trade-offs are consistent. So whether you're recruiting domestically or internationally or both, you are likely being asked to do more with less and find ways to reach more students without adding operational complexity. So it is critical, I think, to utilize tools and strategies that allow you to engage in multiple student populations, both domestic and international, multiple states, without having to run entirely separate systems, processes, or campaigns. So, in moments like this, I think efficiency is not just helpful, it's actually necessary. And that becomes a lot more clear when we look at our data. So what you're seeing here, this is kind of an alarming slide. I'm going to spend a little bit of time here. What you're seeing here is a 5-year review of application volume and enrollment outcomes, and it tells a pretty clear story. It shows that schools that grew enrollment between 2018 and 2023 did so through substantial application growth, on average about 20% across the 5 years. That's about 3.7% per year. The tough part is that institutions who held application volume pretty steady, even just within a couple of percentage points of their previous baseline, they actually saw enrollment declines of 20 to 25%. So in today's market, what I'm saying is application growth is not just about expanding, it's actually the new requirement just for stability. So institutions don't need to just grow, but they need to grow in ways that are sustainable, scalable, and aligned with where the students actually are. So where the students actually are, with that in mind, we wanted to take a quick moment just to highlight where matched students actually are. So this is a snapshot of our US-based audience from last year. You can see the top states, which are constantly jockeying for space on this slide, our top majors that students are identifying as their primary areas of interest. We're watching this as this sort of changes again throughout the year as things start to evolve. You can see our average GPA on the domestic side, how many direct to high school and district partnerships we ended the year on, and the percentage of our students who are identifying as either first generation or working with community-based organizations. On the global side, again, our list of top 10 countries, constantly in flux, our top programs of interest, average GPA on a normalized US scale. We checked this like 3 times. It is exactly the same as the US side. So, um, the primary curriculums our students are studying, and finally, their average annual budget planned for higher ed costs. So, we've seen who both our domestic and abroad students are, why building those pipelines is mission critical. I want to take a quick moment just to highlight another way that you can make kind of every dollar count on the ground, which is using your match data when you're planning your travel and how you can turn your strategy from more of a scattergun approach to more of a precision tool. You can learn how to pinpoint the right cities and events, domestic and international, so that you're meeting students where they're most ready to engage. So, first, I want to encourage you to run a quick audit of your historical match offers by state or even country. If you've been with us more than a year, or if you're having trouble with this, we can help you to sort of identify some of these hotspots. For new partners, I really encourage you to keep an eye on match trends over the next few months, especially. The next thing is considering shifting part of your travel spend toward your yield activities.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this session, you've got three main takeaways to develop as part of your match strategy. So treating these match admits as a unique population by reaffirming their admission status and incorporating your highlight reel. We've also given you some tips on engaging counselors and supporters to, again, help drive that student engagement and build relationships. And then last up is just really helping you expand your reach and find those students, outside of traveling or digging into your data. We are so happy to help and we want to continue the conversation. And so you all know, but I want to highlight it again, our open Zoom room, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern time. Please pop in. We're happy to help. But also we can schedule specific time. And so following this session, I'll include my calendar as well. And so happy to talk about any and all of the things. I know a lot of different strategies were discussed. So depending on what's of interest to you, that's what we can dive into further. And so we just want to keep the conversation going and make sure that you are feeling supported as we enter into this new year.